All right, hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Star Wars Mark of Balance. My name is Mark, and today we're going to be talking about Mandalorian Season 3, Episode 6, Guns for Hire. And this was definitely the most perplexing episode of The Mandalorian to date. In a vacuum, the concept for this episode is actually pretty cool. A buddy cop episode where Mando and Bo are doing this investigation on these rogue droids in this utopian society that you're not really sure you should trust or not. But unfortunately, the concept and the execution of that concept don't line up for this episode. Again, there's a lot of lazy writing choices that have plagued this entire season of The Mandalorian. The fact that this is episode 6 of an 8-episode season that has felt like it's had a tough time getting its footing the entire time, and last week we finally felt like we were making some progress forward. We had a great cliffhanger, we had a big reveal for Bo and the Armorer, and I feel like that momentum just gets squashed within the first 5 minutes of this episode. And it feels like a true filler. And I don't like throwing that word around because I feel like people overuse it at this point, and any episode that doesn't directly affect the main plot is now a terrible filler episode. But that's not what I'm saying. This is a filler because the first 5 minutes of this episode and the last 10 minutes of this episode, if you skipped all of the events in between, nothing has changed. This is one of the only episodes of The Mandalorian where I felt that this middle section of the episode was simply there to pad time to fill out an entire 6th episode. It feels like the writers had no idea how to get more out of this interaction between Bo and the Mandalorian group that she used to be the leader of. So they literally tractor beam us and the main characters to this meaningless side plot where our characters even acknowledge that this feels like a chore. So if we see our characters act like that, we as an audience are also going to be inclined to feel like this is a chore, especially at the second half of the 3rd season of The Mandalorian. Other issue I have is around the Darksaber and the lore around how to inherit it. This goes back all the way to Clone Wars. It's never been completely solid in its mythology, but here it felt very wacky how they just kind of pulled it together. I'm going to talk about that later in the episode because I'm going to talk through the episode step by step, scene by scene, kind of how the plot progresses. But I just wanted to be upfront about that the Darksaber here just feels very wishy-washy. And I don't like that it's losing that true meaning, you know? And finally, my last big criticism is around the overuse of cameos in this episode. I'll talk about that a bit later. I didn't hate any of them, but I think the grouping of them all in one episode took me out of Star Wars a bit, and I'll get into that a little later when I get to that point. I do have some positive things to say about this episode. Like I said in the beginning, I like the concept of it in a vacuum. And the other thing I want to talk about, which goes right into the first scene, is the use of these practical effects and having these aliens have these huge speaking roles. I think the Quarren, the Mon Cala looked fantastic in this opening scene, and the Quarren are such a difficult species to bring to live action, and I thought they did a great job because even in the Clone Wars, their mouths never really moved or you couldn't really see them, so the whole mouth sync thing that happened last week with the pirate, I didn't really have that issue this week. And I know I'm skipping ahead, but the Ugnaughts later on, when they go and see the Ugnaughts about the droids and how they might have started to malfunction, the Ugnaughts look great in their speaking roles. I know they had one in the first season, which, it took me back to such a great time in The Mandalorian. I have spoken. I miss the magic of that first season so much. But the aliens and the prosthetics have really been a huge positive for me this entire season. I think they've done a fantastic job the entire time with the practical effects. And I just wanted to call that out because I think these are very difficult species to bring to live action, and they're doing a great job of it. But essentially, these old Mandalorians that Bo used to be the leader of are now mercenaries, guns for hire. Title, episode, Family Guy reference, boom. And as I've said before, and what they've previously established in Star Wars, is that Mandalorians, or at least New Age Mandalorians, are very wishy-washy. They'll follow anyone who has power, they'll follow anyone who wants to be the leader, and you can see that here with, what's his name, Axel Wolf or something? I forget his name, but they're basically protecting this city using Moff Gideon's old cruiser that they stole, I think. I think it's Moff Gideon's cruiser, and now the city is paying them for protection, so Bo and Din come in, they get tractor beamed in, and they go into this utopia, which is funny. It looks like a dome. It looks like Mandalore, because Mandalore is all like domed cities, but I digress. It was like a utopia. It was really cool. I liked the aesthetic of it. It felt very Cloud City-esque. That's why I kind of thought they were going in the direction that there was an underbelly of it that was very dark and seedy, but that never really came to fruition. But we are introduced to Jack Black, who you hear his voice, and even though he was a little tiny speck on the screen from far away, you're like, yep, that's Jack Black. And Lizzo, which was really surprising to see. And this was the beginning of the cameo fest of celebrities in this episode. And again, I don't have anything against any of these celebrities being in this episode. I think they all did a good job, and they're all big fans of Star Wars. I know Jack Black is. I know Lizzo literally dressed up as Yoda or Baby Yoda last year for Halloween, and Christopher Lloyd, obviously sci-fi legend from Back to the Future. I think it's great that they're contributing to Star Wars. I'm glad they got the opportunity to be in Star Wars. But with celebrity cameos in Star Wars, you feel like you're taken out of the magic. You feel like it's more of a Hollywood production and less of a galaxy far, far away. That's kind of what the practical effects and the prosthetics do. They immerse you in that galaxy. It feels lived in. But then when you see characters like a famous pop singer like Lizzo and then Jack Black, and you're like, whoa. I'm taken out of it. I'm taken out of it a bit. So when you're using cameos in Star Wars, I feel it's smart to spread them out. I like having, once in a while, we have Bill Burr in the first season and the second season. Great cameo. Not what you expect. Doesn't take you out of it because they space it out. It's not clustered. We had Matt Lanter, who played Anakin Skywalker, the voice of Anakin from Clone Wars. He had a cameo in one of the episodes in season 2. Cool. Love that. But I think when you have this many big cameos in one episode so condensed, it does affect the immersion. I think you guys know what I'm saying, but it was definitely like Disney-fying Star Wars, which I didn't like very much. So that's why it sat wrong with me. But kind of going back to the point of having this seedy underbelly, you get this feeling that everything's too perfect and that the higher-ups are living this lavish lifestyle, and then maybe the people below and the lower classes are affected by their lavish lifestyle. You see Jack Black kind of be like, oh no, the droids are fine. I oversaw the programming itself. And Lizzo's like, we used to rule this planet, but then, this Imperial came, and that's who Jack Black used to be. And you were kind of getting this vibe like, oh, maybe there is something else going on here. Unfortunately, they don't commit to that, but it was an interesting start. It had some intrigue to it. And I like the idea that the New Republic doesn't let them have a standing army, so they can't hire guns and then have them in the city. So none of their officers have guns, and the Mandalorians are bound by their culture to have weapons and armor on them. So technically, that's a little workaround to the New Republic. So I did think that aspect was a pretty cool idea and a clever writing choice. Jack Black's character also mentions that, oh, maybe I could speak on the behalf of Mandalore to the New Republic and recognize you as a new system when you rebuild your world. And that's, enticing. Again, a clever writing choice to really make Bo and Din have to stay and do this. So again, there were some good portions of this episode, and the concept overall is cool. So then Bo and Din have to go on their little detective journey to find out these droids that are running amok on the townspeople. They do the jobs wrong. They start to get violent sometimes. They malfunction. So they go to the Ugnaughts, like I said earlier. I thought it was really cool to call back to that first season and Mando remembering that really important relationship he had that made him recognize that he should go after Grogu and save him, and bringing that here to these Ugnaughts, and they, respected him. They knew the legend of, I feel bad, I forget his name, but they knew the legend of the original Ugnaught we met in season 1, and there's that mutual respect, so that was really cool to see. And then the first weird writing choice. So they go to the docks where there's apparently a malfunctioning droid. Cool to see battle droids in live action, very cool. I like that they used the battle droid voice from Clone Wars. That was awesome. I was like, total validation in live action. They went against what the live action droids used to sound like, which I was like, damn, okay. But essentially they go there and the battle droid's like, oh, I just had them all scrubbed. They're not going to have any issues. And so Din resorts to kicking all of the droids in this line. And of course, Din doesn't like droids. That was very apparent in this episode. They really nailed down on that. They're like, remember, I don't like droids. They killed my family. But Din never talks about it to Bo. He never confides in her like, oh yeah, my family was slaughtered by these droids. That's why I don't like them. Maybe that they had that conversation before, but for some reason, some of these things in this show do not stick with me. And I don't think they've had that conversation like, oh yeah, my family was murdered and I was probably saved by Death Watch. Probably your people, but maybe I'm forgetting. I don't know. But essentially, Din starts kicking these droids in the hopes that they'll retaliate and they'll find the bad one. But was the plan to just kick every single droid in this conveyor belt until one snapped? I was just like, this is a weird way to find the one single droid. Again, that might be a nitpick, I don't know. But we get this cool chase scene where the Mandalorians are actually running at full speed with the armor, which is pretty impressive. I was like, damn, okay, those stunt actors, or if it's Pedro and Katie, good for them, that's awesome. But they get the droid, and then conveniently there's like a chip that says, oh, they got this from this droid bar. They go to the droid bar. It was a cool little flip on New Hope where in the cantina in the New Hope, they're like, oh, no droids allowed in here. Now it's like the flip. They're the only living beings, and all the droids are like, hey, what the heck? What are they doing here? And they let them in, and it's nice that the droids are given that moment to shine and given that personality like we love about the droids in Star Wars. I did enjoy this humanizing perspective from the droids, that they're aware of their own mortality, that they know that they'll be scrapped if the New Republic finds them and they don't stay in this kind of sanctuary city. And they're trying to avoid that at all costs. And I think that was just really interesting and a new concept, and that they felt that these battle droids were giving them a bad rap. Like, we want to help you guys. We want to get our names cleared, that not all droids are bad. It's just these couple reprogrammed ones. And so as Mando and Bo go down this rabbit hole, they find that this droid bar is serving this drink lubricant thing that essentially has these nanobots in it that reprogram the droids back to their original programming, and then it was bought by the head of security some years ago. So then they confront Christopher Lloyd's character, who then does this whole like manifesto on, I love democracy, but I liked what Count Dooku was speaking about democracy, so I was a separatist, not part of the Republic. But in the end, I really don't know what his end goal was. Was he hoping that eventually all of these nanodroids would be into every droid, or at least former battle droid in the city, and then he could activate them all at once and restore the separatists on this planet, or make the planet mold to him? Like, I just never got that at the end. It was very unclear what his ultimate motivation was for doing this. And maybe I missed it, but I don't think I did. I think it was just very rushed. And so then they apprehend him and they bring him to Jack Black and Lizzo, and Lizzo's like, I used to trust you. You were around when my family was around. And he's like, I regret this so much. And it's like, what? No, you don't. Why would this was just so thrown together in the end? And he's like, I'll be thinking about this for a long time. And she's like, maybe you'll be pardoned one day. And there was just like this relationship that they were trying to form there that just wasn't there. Maybe that's, Lizzo not being a trained actor. I don't know. The resolution felt very rushed because at the end of the day, this whole side plot was just to fill time for this entire episode to get to the end, the actual important stuff of Bo going back to her cohort of Mandalorian. Oh, and Grogu gets knighted because that's cute. And he's good at space bocce ball. So yeah, Grogu's a knight now. Not a Jedi knight, a knight of whatever planet this is. Again, I think that feeds into the unseriousness of the society and the pampered life that they live, and droids do everything. No one really has a job. Like, I get it. Like, that would be an unserious thing. Like, oh, I'll just knight anyone that I really like. So it's not a big nitpick, but I don't know. It was just like an odd, felt very Disney type moment, not very Star Wars type moment, which was like, give me the sword. You're a knight now. Boom. Maybe I'm being a no fun guy. I don't know. Stick in the mud, whatever. So then we finally get back on track, and Bo and Din go to the Mandalorians, and Bo is like, I want to challenge you to bring you guys back together. We're trying to restore Mandalore. We have to do this together. And he's like, no, you're not the true ruler. You don't even have the Darksaber. So then he and Bo have this duel where they use all their gadgets on their wrists. They use their jetpacks. It's very brutal. They fly on top of ships. They get pulled down from ships. It's good. Like, I really enjoyed the choreography of this, and I think Bryce Dallas Howard did a great job shooting it. In the end, Bo wins, and this is where the episode gets a little interesting. We play a game of semantics. So Din is like, I want you to have the Darksaber. They're like, nope, you can't do that. You can't just hand it off. Even though Bo got the Darksaber from Sabine, literally handing it to her in front of a bunch of other Mandalorians who were like, yeah, I'm with that. So back then it was okay for someone to hand off the Darksaber. It was supported by all Mandalorians when the Empire was destroying their world. But now, after the Empire has destroyed their world even more, they're still not going to overlook this very dogmatic rule that the Darksaber has to be won in combat. Then Din comes in and says, well, technically, I was captured by someone, and she picked up the Darksaber and defeated that person. So technically, she beat the person that beat me. So does that not mean that she is entitled to the Darksaber? And I was just sitting there like, wait a minute. We're now saying that anyone who has ever beaten anyone who has ever had the Darksaber is now the rightful owner of the Darksaber. Because then, in that case, Maul beat Pre Vizsla, Obi-Wan kills Maul in Rebels. So Obi-Wan is the rightful owner of the Darksaber. Is that what we're saying now? Because that's what we're saying. And that is such a slippery slope that anyone who's ever beaten anyone who has also beaten someone with the Darksaber is now able to claim the Darksaber. It was just very an unsatisfying moment that didn't feel like it had a lot of emotional weight behind it because it just kind of felt thrown together. When Sabine trained with the Darksaber, she fought against Kanan, and she came to this moment, she faced her family, and she finally said, this isn't for me. I've so much more to repent for what I did to Mandalore. I'm going to pass it off to someone who's been fighting for Mandalore this whole time and will reunite them. And she gives it to Bo, and it feels very earned. But here we're just playing like a game of semantics, because then it's like, well, why don't you just like have Bo and Din fight and then Din just yield? Because then you just need to win in combat. So, okay, just set up a fake duel and say, oh, I yield. But then people could say, oh, well, then there's no honor in that. It's like, well, where's the honor in any of this right now? Because we're just kind of throwing rules out there. So it seems like I'm very heated about this, and I think you guys can tell that. But when it comes to the lore and what they've built, I know it's never been concrete around the Darksaber, but I just think this whole semantics thing is very odd from a writing perspective. Because now it feels like, oh, all of this tension between Bo and Din that magically disappeared after episode 3 around the Darksaber, it never needed to be there because he could have just like been handing it off to her. Because I'm sure in the great lexicon of people they've both fought, Din has probably lost to someone that she's probably beaten. I don't know. Maybe I'm going a little too deep into it, but it was just such an odd choice. So now, once again, Bo has been given the Darksaber by someone, and Din, not that he ever needed the Darksaber, not that he ever wanted the Darksaber. I never wanted him to really rule Mandalore with the Darksaber. Like, that was never like my theory or anything like that. So it doesn't bother me that he doesn't have the Darksaber anymore. It just bothers me how this event came about. And by the end, it's supposed to be like this triumphant moment. I'm just kind of like, we're playing a word game now. There's 2 episodes left, so we'll see where it goes. Again, you never know until the season ends. But for me, this episode just had a lot of those weird, lazy writing choices that have kind of been happening throughout the season. And it ends on a huge lore piece that affects a lot of other things that I don't really think was earned. Sorry for ranting, but I feel like you guys secretly love it. So when I can rant, I rant for you guys. That's a lie. I love excuses to rant. Oh, it's great. But anyway, overall, I think the concept for this episode was cool in a vacuum, but unfortunately, it's in the later half of the 3rd season of Mandalorian, coming off a huge cliffhanger and a lot of momentum that I think screeches to a halt because of this side story that feels like the epitome of filler. And while I enjoy the huge incorporation of aliens with speaking roles and the practical effects and prosthetics used in this episode, I think the plot overall falls flat in the end. Any intrigue that was built up in the beginning or throughout the episode doesn't really have a great payoff, and it doesn't really feel like it amounted to much, which is what fillers do, and unfortunately only strengthens the case that this was kind of thrown together to fill time for this entire episode to get from point A to point B. And while I appreciate the 3 celebrities and actors that were cameoed in this episode, from Jack Black to Lizzo to Christopher Lloyd, I think the cluster of them all in one episode kind of breaks the immersion of Star Wars, and I felt it was a very Disney thing to do, which I did not enjoy. And I'm so happy they were in Star Wars. I know they're Star Wars fans, and I appreciate them for contributing to the Star Wars galaxy. I think they were fine in their roles. Love Jack Black and his role. Big surprise. But I just think a concentration of celebrity cameos is not the best thing for Star Wars. And finally, the Darksaber lore and the weight behind it and who holds it has felt very watered down, especially after the semantics game that we play in this episode. So the payoff in the end does not feel as earned or as emotional as it probably should have. And yeah, I'm just hoping these last 2 episodes really, really bring it home with Moff Gideon, these Mandalorians coming together and maybe Din doing something, because unfortunately he's felt like a side character this season, which is fine to make your main character the side character when other characters are shining. But unfortunately, he kind of feels directionless, and I hope that these last 2 episodes can reconcile that. Grogu has had a pretty solid season so far. He's been sidelined these past 2 weeks, which is fine. I think it's good to sideline him and don't just throw him in the episode to say, oh, Grogu's still in this episode. I think that's great that they're doing that. But I hope he gets this emotional payoff at the end of the season. And yeah, this is unfortunate that episode 6 did not live up to the expectations, but I don't think those expectations were unwarranted in the slightest. I don't think this is a case where we were overestimating them going into this week. I think they set it up. I think they said, look at this cliffhanger, look at where we're going, and they sidetracked it. So those are my thoughts. I really want to hear what you guys thought of this episode. Did you really like it? Did you like the sidetrack? Did you like the utopian intrigue detective type of story? Let me know on Instagram at @star_wars_ mark of balance. I promise, guys, I love Star Wars. You guys know I love Star Wars, but sometimes you got to be really critical when it's necessary. And in this case, I felt it's very necessary. So I'll see you guys next week to discuss episode 7, the penultimate episode of Mandalorian season 3. Until then, thank you so much for listening. As always, stay safe, stay healthy, and may the Force be with you. Peace.